everybody, welcome to the online interview of the media experts. So very excited about our guest today, Mr. MacGregor, the very active Managing Director of Savills Vietnam. Welcome to the media expert, Neil.
Thank you very much for having me, Mauro.
So Neil has been in Vietnam for more than 19 years, so I'm sure he went through the few up and down already into the market, and I'm sure he will be able to take us through what he thinks about the future and when we will expect a recovery and when the situation will get better. So I'll start with the first question for him, is how he's doing, his team is doing, and generally what Savills Vietnam is doing in this period to take the best out of this situation.
Thank you, Mauro. Well, obviously, I have been in Vietnam a very long time. I have seen several cycles in the property market in Vietnam over that period, but we've not seen anything quite like this. But having been through those previous cycles, it's enabled us as a business to prepare for the eventuality and for a downturn, given that we were going through a boom period in Vietnam leading into this crisis. So we have worked very hard to create a very diversified business. And that means that we have a very broad cross-section of service lines, covering everything from property management at one end of the scale, the market research, the advisory services, as well as the agency services, which are, of course, the services that are most impacted in the current environment. That has ensured that we have a stable business through difficult periods like this. Operationally, I think it's our property management business that have obviously faced the biggest challenges. We've been very proud of the way they've reacted to those challenges, been able to overcome them. We've been able to deploy our new property management software to its full extent during this period as our main communication tool with residents, with developers, and across our property management teams. So that's been a blessing that we had that fully operational going into the crisis, and has enabled our property management teams to rise to the challenge and effectively communicate with everybody that's been required. Apart from that, the other teams are doing okay. Transactional business is slowing down. The office market deals are still progressing in terms of office leases, but deals are taking longer to convert as you'd expect. The retail market's obviously facing particular challenges, so a lot of those deals have dried up. Interestingly, on the investment markets, we're still seeing a lot of those deals progressing with those investors taking a much longer term view and looking beyond the crisis and the fundamentals that Vietnam offers. So it's not a rosy picture throughout, but I think as a business, we're well placed to get through this.
Okay, excellent. So let's move it from the situation now into a bit on the future, and let's talk about recovery. What's your opinion into the recovery? And again, you don't need to specifically be in hospitality, just general real estate is good. We will see a very fast recovery or something that will stretch through next year, or maybe the hospitality or real estate will never be the same as before?
Yeah, a couple of key points to make, I think, for Vietnam that are Vietnam specific. First of all, I think the Vietnam authorities have done an amazing job at firstly controlling the outbreak. We still have one of the lowest infection rates and 0 deaths in Vietnam. Let's hope that continues. But barring a few other countries, we are exceptional in that regard. Taiwan might be another exceptional case that controlled the outbreak very well. The second point is that going into this crisis, we were suffering from a lack of supply. We had very, very tight supply across most sectors of the market. And that's particularly pronounced in Ho Chi Minh City in the residential sector. And that's why I think coming out of this, the underlying demand is still strong across most residential products. Of course, there will be some short-term impact, but I do think the residential market will bounce back relatively quickly and relatively strongly because of that tight supply and the underlying strength of the demand. The office sector also had those supply constraints, but obviously tenants will start to reconsider how they utilize office space over the longer term. So they may not make decisions as quickly as they might have done in 2020. But again, I think due to the tight supply, office rents will actually bounce back quite strongly in 2021 and beyond. There's an opportunity in the short term, of course, for office occupiers to go through that process of reconsidering their office space and resetting their rents in their leases. Retail is obviously having a hard time, and I think the retail market will have to reset. I think there will have to be a reconsideration for retailers globally, not just in Vietnam. Vietnam is perhaps in a better position than many, that we didn't have oversupply of retail space. So there is an opportunity to reset, reposition retail going forward, and we have the amazing demographics that Vietnam has. On the industrial side, obviously there's going to be a slowdown in consumer spending, which will lead to a slowdown in manufacturing demand. But due to some of the supply chain issues that have been highlighted in China, we are expecting a fairly strong bounce in manufacturing in Vietnam. We think that the attractions of the industrial market in Vietnam leading up to this crisis will continue and may even be highlighted due to some of those supply chain issues in China. And the related sector, logistics, obviously e-commerce is booming globally off the back of the crisis. It's one of the bright spots in the economy. And there's going to be strong demand for distribution warehousing and last mile logistics in Vietnam. So that will be a key growth sector. And I think we'll see a lot of investor interest in logistics over the coming years. So all in all, yes, clearly some short-term pain, but we think Vietnam's in a very strong position to have an earlier recovery than most. Maybe not the V shape that we all wish for, but not far from it.
Not far from it. Okay, very good. Maybe 1 second. I need to pause this and then. Okay, excellent. Thank you very much. So last question, still looking into the future, which is what everybody will love to have a bit of insight into. Distressed asset and investment market in 2021. Do you see a lot of opportunity in Vietnam for developer to actually develop or investor to buy? Do you see this new wave of opportunity coming, or pretty much everything will come back to where it was before, faster?
It's a very good question, and we're obviously getting a lot of queries from investors as to the volume of distressed assets that we might see. In previous crises in Vietnam, typically those distressed assets have not reached the open market, and it's been particularly difficult for foreign investors to access such distressed assets. We do feel that it will be somewhat different this time around. There is not the same relationship that was the case during the GFC between banks and developers. A lot of the corporate governance that the government has been pushing through has successfully removed that conflict of interest. And therefore, I think we will see more distressed assets reaching the open market. And we are already reaching out to the banks themselves, as well as some of our developer clients that we think may need assistance in that regard. So I think this time around there will be such assets available. And I would even go so far as to predict that off the back of that, through 2021 to say 2023, we may actually see record transaction volumes in Vietnam. So I think M&A activity during that 2021 to say 2023 period is going to be very intense. And I think investors that have been attracted by Vietnam's fundamentals will find those opportunities that they had maybe been struggling to find over the last few years coming out of this crisis. So that is a potential bright spot for those investors that have been keen on Vietnam, but maybe have just not found that right opportunity as yet.
Okay, thank you, Neil. I think it was one of our longest interview by far, but it's good. There was a full of information, so I'm sure that the people will come and listen and have a lot of good advice.
Right.
So thank you for joining us. As you know, we are preparing all our webinar series and we'll go in parallel with what Savills Vietnam is doing in terms of other sector webinar, just to keep helping people to stay informed. I think one of the key things we can do in period like this is to share information and keep engaging with the industry expert as well as with the developer and everybody working in the industry, and we try to do our best. So thank you very much, Neil, for joining us today.
Thank you, Mauro. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.